Hello, and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your daily dose of the latest news, rumours, and speculation about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. The day is Wednesday, September 28th, and I'm your host, Harry. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. After another long week's wait, we're back with our in-depth breakdown of Episode 5 of the Rings of Power, Partings. I released my spoiler review for the episode on Sunday, but just as we do every week, I am joined once again by Anna Maya-Lasar to break down all the juicy details, theorise, and have a wider discussion about the episode. We once again took questions from listeners on Twitter, and this week we had so many to answer. We tried our best to spread them out throughout the episode, but also left quite a few to the end, so make sure you stick around to hear those. Also, for those of you who do stick around to the end of the episode, you'll get a fun bonus story about the time Anna and I realised quite how chronically online we were while we were at the world premiere in London. But, as always, we begin today's episode with a reading from the Professor's work. Today's reading comes from Unfinished Tales, The Disaster of the Gladden Fields. The river was swirling dark and swift before him. He stood for a while, alone and in despair. Then in haste he cast off all his armour and weapons, save a short sword at his belt, and plunged into the water. He was a man of strength and endurance that few even of the Dunedain of that age could equal, but he had little hope to gain the other shore. Before he had gone far, he was forced to turn almost north against the current, and strive as he might, he was ever swept down towards the tangles of the Gladden Fields. They were nearer than he had thought, and even as he felt the stream slacken and had almost won across, he found himself struggling among great rushes and clinging weeds. There, suddenly, he knew that the ring had gone. By chance or chance well used, it had left his hand and gone where he could never hope to find it again. At first so overwhelming was his sense of loss that he struggled no more, and would have sunk and drowned. But swift as it had come, the mood passed. The pain had left him, a great burden had been taken away. His feet found the riverbed, and heaving himself up out of the mud, he floundered through the reeds to a marshy islet close to the western shore. There he rose up out of the water, only a mortal man, a small creature, lost and abandoned in the wilds of Middle-earth. I love this passage from Unfinished Tales, and as we spend some time in this episode talking about Isildur's character and his future, I thought it would be a fitting introduction to the episode. Now, we have so much to talk about, so I won't waste any more time, and we'll dive right into our discussion with Anna. Right, well, bing bong, and we're back with another weekly breakdown of this week's episode. And once again, as always, I am joined by the ever-lovely Anna Maya-Lasar. Anna, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you again for having me on, even though it's regular at this point, you know. I feel like people expect me.
It is, yeah. I feel like without being forced to do this by contract, we've ended up forcing ourselves to do this every week, so that's okay. Obviously, we've got a lot to talk about this week. This was a jam-packed episode, a fair bit of controversy in the online space about this episode. So let's get into the episode, and I want to start off, as always, with just your overall thoughts on this episode. Anna, what did you think of episode 5, Partings?
I will get into my kind of overall ranking of where I'd place it in the season, you know, when we do that at the end. It wasn't my favourite so far, and I think that's just because episode 3 and episode 4 were just so good to me that this one it was still a great episode, but it just didn't feel, you know, on par. A lot happened, like you said. I think this is the episode where I felt has been the most balanced in terms of things that I liked and things that I didn't like. So, and it's also somehow the episode that made me the most emotional. There were a lot of scenes that had me I definitely teared up a few times, which I wasn't expecting. But yeah, overall it was a good episode, and I had fun.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think, as you said, that probably resonates for a lot of people that it didn't quite reach the heights of episodes 3 or 4. And because of some of the issues we're no doubt going to talk about, people found it lacking and people found that their overall enjoyment of the episode was a little bit reduced because of that. Not because the overall episode was bad, but just because I feel like some major issues got in the way of that enjoyment. So let's get into the individual storylines. So we are going to start off with Lindon because, as we all know, this is the plot line talking about the fading of the elves, the Mithril, the whole solution to the elves fading. This is what's got everyone up in arms about it. Now, I'll preface this by saying if anyone hasn't listened, I did do 10 minutes quite in detail on this storyline on Sunday's review episode, so feel free to go back and listen to that. But Anna, I'd really like to get your take on that storyline. How did it sit with you overall? Did that, what I'm going to call perceived law change, sit badly for you? What was your thought on that whole sequence of the dinner and Elrond and Gil-galad and Celebrimbor?
Well, the Mithril plot, I didn't have a problem with it at first because I kind of liked the way it tied into Elrond's oath and he had, this decision to make. I do like the way his oath was handled because I was worried that it was just going to be like one episode later and he's completely broken it. So I'm glad they didn't go down that route. I'm not happy with the Mithril plot if we are just taking it as face value and it is going to be it tied into the elves. For all we know, there could be like a million reasons why they've done this, and I hope that it is kind of part of some bigger thing that will explain it. But my main problem with it is that they've taken this really big dwarven plot line and kind of tied it to the elves, which feels quite unnecessary in my opinion. The elves, they have their plot lines and it just felt unnecessary. I think that's the only way I can describe it. I know I spoke to some people on Twitter who said, maybe this could be more of a hint that Sauron is already at work in Eregion, manipulating Celebrimbor, which that's one of the ways it could make sense to me. But if we are just taking this as at face value, it doesn't work for me. As for the dinner scene, I quite enjoyed that, and I know a lot of people had issues with Gil-galad, especially. I enjoyed, the sarcastic kind of way Benjamin was portraying him, and especially as we got into the scene between him and Elrond, my on par with like my favorite moment from the episode, just a wonderful quote about, hope is never meager. Like, I have not stopped thinking about that since the episode dropped, but I like this kind of two-toned way he's playing him, in front of the dwarves and in front of the elves. He's a completely different person, which I think in terms of his character, it makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't have a problem with the way Benjamin Walker is playing Gil-galad. I think it's very hard to judge. We've effectively had, I would at best say 3 scenes of real dialogue from Gil-galad, one of which is in front of, a kind of what we'd refer to, I guess, in the real world as a foreign dignitary in the form of Durin. So he, to a certain extent, is going to be wearing that mask of a king and a politician. And, Benjamin Walker was interviewed by the Tolkien professor and Maggie Park after the episode. And, he talked about this dichotomy in Gil-galad's nature really originating from Tolkien's own writing. This idea that, Tolkien never really defined his character, both in terms of his parentage and in terms of what his role would be. He's a character really reverse engineered to be the leader of the elves at the Last Alliance. And Benjamin Walker talked about the fact that because of that, in their portrayal of him, they're trying to flesh that out, but also reconcile that with the idea that Gil-galad is warrior king, and yet he is also politician and ruling king. He is a survivor of the first age of the Noldor, yet he is also clearly got his own agenda for the High Kingship for the Second Age. So I really liked Benjamin Walker's performance. I wrote a short thread about this the other day, basically raising the point that Gil-galad is mentioned about 110 times across Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales. Of those, probably 20 or 30 of those are index entries anyway, so they barely count. And what we find out from all the others is just that, great king, warrior king, very noble. But my point being is that we don't find a lot of tangible material about who he was as an individual, what his approach was as a ruler. And so I think people just need to bear that in mind, that you may not like so far the way Gil-galad's been portrayed, but I don't think there's any reason to say that it is going against Tolkien's writings yet. And some of that will depend upon how the Mithril plotline plays out, but to me, I feel like we need to give it more time.
Absolutely. And I think it's, if you can accept the way Elendil's being played, it's a similar situation where he's an established character, but Tolkien's works only scratch the surface of what we know about him. So a lot of it is on the screenwriters and the actors to kind of fill in the gaps and flesh them out properly. It is a lot of waiting because they're not as widely established as a lot of the ones we're watching, like Galadriel and Elrond.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got a question from Elect Exile who, asked us about, Benjamin Walker's interview last Friday, saying regarding Gil-galad, he is, quote, not beguiled by Anatar, and, quote, sorry, and quote, those of you who are familiar with the source material, you've got an idea where we're headed. And so that's something I wanted to ask you about, because, and this feeds into a question we also got from Eowyn, who asked about, is there a way this Mithril plotline could work out? And what I essentially said on Sunday's episode was there's two ways this can work out in my mind while still sort of holding true to the lore. The first way is, as you kind of said, Sauron's already in Eregion as Anatar. He's deceiving Celebrimbor either because he wants to get his hands on Mithril, which we know Sauron always did, or because he's already planted the idea of the Rings of... And we know Mithril's going to play a role in that. Or option 2 is Sauron hasn't revealed himself yet, but he has been working, in the way we've seen, to corrupt things like nature, so he perhaps is behind the rot spreading through Linden's great tree and other things we've seen, and therefore it's not Sauron's advice as Anatar who's brought us to this point, but maybe the elves' own paranoia and panic, which is making them think that everything is fading so much more quickly than we would expect from the books. And so I guess where I'm going with that is, where do you think we're going on that? What do you think is the most likely of those outcomes in terms of how they resolve this plotline?
I think I'm going to go with the first choice. I think Sauron working in Eregion is my solution for a lot of the issues I have with the show. So, if we get to that point and he's not, then RIP to me. But the second one just feels a little bit too much of a jump, from point A to point B. And it feels very much okay, we need the elves to be involved with this plot line. How do we get them there? Rather than a natural kind of progression. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I definitely, and as you said, I think it's because we both really like the theory of Anatar already being in Eregion. It works with a lot of the plot lines and would be a nice twist rather than Halbrand or the Stranger or anyone else turning out to be Sauron. I know we're both bigger fans of that. I wanted to get your take on Durin and Elrond's conversation, because we had a question from Claire who asked, did that conversation, once Elrond revealed this fact that Gil-galad did want him to go there to find the Mithril, did you, that conversation, Durin, while he was obviously shocked and hurt, and I thought Owain Arthur did a great job of portraying that, he also accepted it quite quickly and then agreed to help Elrond. Did that conversation go the way you thought it would, or were you surprised by how quickly Durin came around?
I was definitely surprised, but I'm happy with the direction it went in. Like I said, I was scared that they would build this relationship between Elrond and Durin up from episode 2. This is 3 episodes in the works, and then just completely decimate it again when Elrond breaks the oath. But I like that they kind of went down the route of he tells him, and we knew that Durin was already suspicious. He had that conversation with his father, which is why I think part of the reason he went to Linden in the first place. I think it was a little bit of an expectation subversion because we did, I mean, this might just be me. I expected him to get angry, but I'm glad about the acceptance because it feels like he'd kind of prepared himself for this possibility. And like we had heard from Elrond in the previous episode, their friendship is important to him. And we know how important it is to Durin because it was the reason he was so angry in episode 2 because Elrond had missed so much of his life. So I took it from a point of he cares so much about his friendship that he's kind of willing to put this one aside.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I think that's what I really liked about it was that in the same way Elrond doesn't break his oath, he just flat out refuses to answer the question. And I heard some people criticize that and saying, well, by not answering the question, Gil-galad knows it. And that's, to me, that's not the point. The point isn't that, Gil-galad found out. The point is that Elrond himself refused to break it. To break his oath. Now, I don't know quite how that plays into then the fact that he shows it to Celebrimbor, but maybe again at that point, it's a case of Gil-galad and Celebrimbor have worked it out anyway, so it's not a case of breaking his oath. But I agree with you. I liked the expectation subversion that friendship came before that, and I think it also narratively makes more sense because if you think about it from the general audience's perspective, over the last 4 episodes, we've really seen Durin and Elrond's friendship be built up, and so it would be weird now to then, within the story arc of season 1, have that friendship fall apart. I'm not saying their friendship might not encounter difficulties later on. I'm sure it will. But it's nice that they didn't try to make a friendship and break it all within 5 episodes because I feel like that would have been really rushed.
Yeah, and I know I go on about this a lot, but the actors just have so much chemistry. Like, it never feels contrived. It felt completely natural that he would forgive him because they just have such a chemistry. Like, their friendship is completely believable.
Yeah, 100%. Very believable. One thing I do want to touch on before we finish at Linden, because I think, like we both said, we don't really want to sit here for half an hour discussing the Mithril thing because, listen, at this point, everyone knows it is a deviation from the text. We don't know how it's going to work out, with the lore until we see the next few episodes. And that's all we can really say on it. But something I do want to touch on, and I know we talked about this last week at the end of last week's episode as one of my criticisms, and I hate to bring it up again, but it's starting to bother me more, this sidelining of Celebrimbor. And the reason it really bothered me this episode was because, in my view, the reason they've had to invent this Mithril, maybe it's not the reason they've had to, but one of the reasons they've got themselves in this corner with the Mithril plotline is because they've taken away Celebrimbor's pre-existing relationship with the dwarves. And so once you do that, you don't have the Smiths of Eregion and the dwarves of Khazad-dûm working together, trading together, building the doors of Durin from Mithril. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Elrond and Durin's relationship. It does make sense to me from a story perspective that they want to build up the 2 characters who are going to be there for all 5 seasons rather than someone who's going to be there for 2 to 3 at most. But it really it's starting to bother me. I don't know how you feel about it, given we talked about it last week.
Yeah, the more, it wasn't one of my concerns during the first few episodes because I was like, okay, we're on, episode 2, episode 3. There's time for them to kind of establish them. But I think I said last week, this was the episode where I wanted to see it happen because I thought, this dinner party scene, we'd got quite a few snippets of it, in the promotional material. And I thought it was going to be a lot bigger of an event than it was. It felt like it just came and went. And Gil-galad and Celebrimbor, they've, hats off to the actors because they're doing, a phenomenal job with the characters. But I think they're definitely being failed by the script because at the moment they feel more like plot devices to carry on the stories of other characters rather than important characters themselves. Because, going forward, they're integral to their respective stories. And I just don't know how people, especially people who don't know a lot about kind of the lore, are going to be able to tell this just from the things we've gotten so far. They just kind of feel like generic figures at the moment that are there to continue Elrond's story rather than establish their own.
Yeah, I think I agree on that. I think also, I think like I've said before, Benjamin Walker and Charles Edwards are doing great work. What bothered me particularly in this episode about when Celebrimbor did get dialogue was that it just seemed like they focused on the wrong aspects. Like I really in fact liked last episode the idea that Celebrimbor had met Elrond's father because he would have been in the Havens of Sirion and he would have been in Gondolin before that, most likely. So I've got no issue with that. The issue I've got is then they brought it up again this episode.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense to me that Celebrimbor would have been there when Eärendil was leaving and his wife was pleading with him not to go. That just seems unlikely. And secondly, it missed an opportunity to have Elrond be struggling with an oath and to have Celebrimbor say, well, my family was destroyed by their unwillingness to break an oath. So this idea that sticking to an oath is always the right option isn't always the case. And I'm not saying they had to go into all that because I know they're not trying to tell the story of the Silmarillion. But then it's frustrating when they bring up the Silmarils like every other episode, and then we get to a scene about an oath. Celebrimbor's there, and he doesn't make the connection between either his grandfather's oath and the rest of his family's oath, or the fact that Elrond's adoptive / kidnapped parents, Mithras and Maglor, were part of that, and their actions resulted in his mother and father, abandoning them. So there's like an element where I don't dislike what Charles Edwards is doing with the character. And maybe it's a rights issue, and that's why they couldn't bring up the Oath of Fëanor or Mithras and Maglor. But it does bother me when, as you said, Celebrimbor feels like he's popped into the story without having his own background. Because apart from that one line, or the couple of lines we got in the second episode about his grandfather's work and wanting to surpass it, I feel like this could have been a really good moment to further develop that character and further develop this anxiety and this burden he feels by his family's legacy. And I just felt like it was a missed opportunity, I guess.
No, it's kind of like when they built up this scene of people clearly making an oath, and then when we saw the actual scene, it kind of panned to Finrod, and everyone was like, "Oh, so it's not that oath." It probably is a rights issue, and I don't understand enough about it to know how it works, but it feels like they have some leeway to mention them. They've mentioned Feanor by name. They've mentioned the Silmarils quite a few times. And this is probably just me, but I don't understand where the limit is for what they can and can't put in. But yeah, Celebrimbor feels like they're writing the script and they're like, oh, Elrond needs some advice, or we need Elrond to change his mind about something. And they kind of pluck him out of a hat and just pop him into the script at that point. That sounds so harsh, but that's just how it feels to me at the moment.
Yeah, no, I like it might be a little bit harsh, but it's also not unfair, I guess is what I'd say. And I think, with the rights issues, I know like where something gets a passing mention in Lord of the Rings, they can therefore reference it. So things like the Two Trees, Silmarils, etc., Beren and Luthien, whatever they could still reference. But then again, I also know that their relationship with the Tolkien estate is ongoing. It's conversation. They can ask for permission, and the fact they talked, not in detail, but they made explicit reference to Eärendil, sailing in Vingalot and leaving the Havens. Even if they didn't mention it by name, it's just kind of like, if we're going to go that far, it just feels like a waste opportunity. Again, there's 3 episodes to go. I really hope we're going to get more Celebrimbor content, but my big worry is episode 6 looks like it's going to be very Southlands heavy. I don't know whether we're going to get anything in Lindon or Eregion next episode. I hope I'm wrong.
Last week was kind of it's fine, wait till next week, this is when we're going to get all the content. And now it's just, I don't know, I don't have much hope for his character this season, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it hurts for me to say. I mean, anyone who follows me on Twitter or knows me in general knows how much I love Celebrimbor as a character and how much I was excited for Charles Edwards and how much I loved his first scenes as well. Like, those scenes in episode 2 were so great.
Yeah.
my only defense for them is, I guess I know the role of Celebrimbor was recast after they'd already started shooting. It was a different actor who was originally cast, and Charles Edwards came in midway through. So maybe there was an issue there, but I'm also pretty sure that happened during the COVID break. And the COVID break basically was after they'd finished most of episodes 1 and 2. So I don't see why that would be affecting episodes, kind of 5 and onwards. But who knows? I mean, I was also sorry, we'll move on from this afterwards, but I just have to get one more thing in. I was really irritated that we got a great new costume for Celebrimbor at the dinner scene. It was this beautiful kind of red and gold robe with this green cloak and these these holly pin brooches. And then when we cut to the scene of him in the forest, he was back wearing his old green costume, which I don't dislike like everyone else does. I think it looks perfectly lovely, but I was just like, why have we gone back to that? Gil-galad got a costume changed. Elrond got a costume change.
Finally.
Yeah. So anyway, let's move on from Lyndon, because while people might have expected us to spend 20 minutes talking about Mithril, they probably didn't expect us to spend 10 minutes talking about Celebrimbor. Anyway, we're going to hold our expectations. We'll see where we are at the end of the season. But I think for both of us, it's just a slightly, it's a bit of a trying to fit a square peg into a round hole sort of situation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's head across the sea to Numenor. And there's quite a bit to talk about in Numenor. I'm not going to, be cruel to you by making you talk about Halbrand first. So I want to be deferential to your interests, and we'll kick the discussion off with a question we got from one of our mutual friends, Sarah Westvick, who asked, Anna mentioned having thoughts on Isildur's character development this episode. I'd love to hear more about that from both of you. So, Anna, talk to me. I know last week we talked about feeling like Isildur's plotline with getting kicked out of the Sea Guard was a little bit rushed. Obviously, this episode we got his opening conversation with Elendil, his confrontation with Kemen, and then his later, his scenes at the end of the episode. Talk to me about how you feel about Isildur's character and the development this episode.
Yeah, I had my issues with the way it was handled in episode 2 and 3, or was it 3 and 4? And they carried on this episode. I mean, we definitely had a lot more time with him, but see, with Isildur, his strongest scenes are when he's talking to his family, I find. Especially Elendil. I love the conversations that they have. And just their dynamic. I think they've set it up really, really well. But I think I can sum up my thoughts on his plotline by saying that at the end, when they're all in the boats preparing to leave for Numenor and it kind of pans out, everyone on that ship's presence feels kind of purposeful and earned to me, except Isildur's. I just, the things that happened this episode could have been done sooner. And I think it's a similar issue too. I don't know if you'll remember me talking about this, but in episode 1 or 2, Bronwyn, tried to get everyone to see things her way, we're in danger and we need to leave. No one believed her, and then she went to her house and got attacked by an orc. She took it back to the inn, and then everyone believed her and they could leave. I had an issue with the way that kind of played out and was paced, and it felt similar to that here, because it was like Elendil needed some proof that Isildur could come along. Isildur just happens to be there when Kemen is, about to blow up the boat, and I do think that makes sense. They set up kind of them crossing paths well, but it felt like, okay, Isildur's now saved someone's life, so he can come. And it just didn't feel earned to me. And I know a lot of people were happy with it, which I'm glad about, because it might just be me and my expectations for his story were too high. But yeah, they're my brief thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I think you make a very good argument, and I think I probably agree with you. I don't even want to say 50%. I feel like I agree with you 70%. Here's what I'll say. I think what we missed was a scene after he rescued Kemen. And whether that's another scene with his father, whether his father says, listen, what you did was very brave, very heroic. You saved, the Chancellor's son, and therefore, I'm sorry for being so harsh to you, and, here you go. Or we needed a scene where Isildur confronts Kemen and says, what the hell were you doing? And Kemen says, listen, you don't want any questions about what you were doing on that boat. I don't want any questions about what I was doing on that boat. If you keep quiet, I'll pull some strings. Because, he's the Chancellor's son. He's a noble. He could definitely do it. I'll pull some strings and get you a spot on that boat. And I feel like if we'd had one of those two, then it would have felt more complete and more I don't know, more linked. And I have been wondering with a couple of the last episodes whether some of this is a symptom of scenes getting deleted. We know, for example, there was meant to be a big banquet scene in Numenor where Pharazôn has a bit of not a confrontation, but shuts his son down at one point for speaking up, and then was meant to ask Arya her views. I've heard that scene was cut. And I know these are already long episodes, don't get me wrong. For TV, they're already easily over an hour long, most episodes. So I get it, but I think occasionally things are getting lost in the cut that are maybe reducing that. And similarly, actually, no, let me finish talking about Isildur first. What I did want to say that I thought was well done was that I thought the interactions between Isildur and his friends Valandil and Ontamo were really good. Like, I thought that whole plot line was very rewarding, wasn't rushed, and then made sense at the end that they reconciled. I don't know if you had a similar experience with that part.
Yeah, it's like you said a few episodes ago, I can't remember which episode exactly, but you were annoyed about how rushed his plotline felt because the end result was his confrontation with his friends, and it was really well done. I like that he didn't forgive him immediately. They kind of had that ongoing tension, and then obviously he had that line about I hope there's something you care about that much one day, which, yikes in the future. But it was just, I think that was a really well done interaction. And that's the thing, it's his general storyline that I dislike, like, the way that it's kind of been handled, but his interactions with a lot of the other characters are so good that I wish that I could appreciate them more. And I feel like I've been so mean on the writers this podcast. Like, I don't want everyone to think that I'm just ragging on all the writing because, there's only so much that you can fit into these episodes, like you said. But yeah, his storyline at this point feels his journey from episode 2 to, no, episode 3, we got to Numenor, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
His journey from episode 3 to now, it doesn't feel like a journey to me. And yeah, hopefully there'll be more time to focus on him when we get to Middle Earth, but I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you said, the overall story arc for Isildur has maybe been a little bit rushed, but I do like some of the, I talked about this on Sunday's episode, I do like that we're getting to know a lot about Isildur through these scenes, this idea that he's a bit aimless. He wants to serve, but he doesn't know really how to serve. He feels like he should be doing something grander. He feels this pull to what his brother's doing in the west of Numenor. And I like all that. I actually thought the line about hopefully one day you'll find something that you'd be willing to sacrifice everything for. I know everyone's been saying that's about his failure to sacrifice everything at Mount Doom. I actually think that it's about his actual willingness at the very end of his life to sacrifice everything at the Gladden Fields, because people who've seen the Peter Jackson films but not read Unfinished Tales might not know this, but in the Unfinished Tales version and within the canon more broadly, when Isildur is getting ambushed by the orcs, he's actually going to take the One Ring to the 3 elven keepers. So at that point, it's Elrond, Círdan, and Galadriel, because he knows that he can't handle it and he can't keep onto it. And then even once they're ambushed and things are looking so dire, he sends one of his sons off as fast as he can to get out of there, and he sacrifices himself while he's still trying to get away. I'm not saying it's necessarily a completely selfless moment, but it is a moment where he does sacrifice everything while trying to do the right thing. So I like that line has multiple meanings. And again, what I like about Isildur's character so far this season is, while the story arc has felt a little bit like, okay, we want Isildur to go to Middle Earth, so what's the quickest A to B route to get there? I like that along the way, we're finding out a lot about him as a person.
Yeah, because as much as I love the Peter Jackson films, they did Isildur so dirty. Like, you know, coming away from having just watched those films, you would think he was just always a bad person, I guess.
Mm.
And I really do appreciate that he's getting this development, and there's such a nuance being brought to his character now. And even though I'm not entirely happy with it at the moment, I am excited to see it continue, you know, because it's not a case of I know I'm going to hate it forever. It's a case of I'm kind of nervous to see how it develops, but I'm excited because my expectations aren't too high for it, so I think I can be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of room there as well to still grow. Something I just wanted to talk about, which is adjacent to Isildur's story, was Aarion. And this isn't just me saying this because, like, I'm a big fan of the concept of this character. Like, as soon as it was announced, I thought it was really interesting, and I like what I've seen so far. But I did think they definitely cut a scene somewhere in there where she would have been talking to Isildur or to Elendil, begging with them not to go, because I know we were meant to infer that from the scene where she's saying to Kemen in the throne room, you can convince him, you can do this. It didn't really land as much for me then when she was looking. I mean, it did have an emotional impact on me when she was standing in the crowd watching Isildur and the rest of the men depart, but I think there would have been more of an emotional weight if we'd got to see her pleading with her father and her brother not to go, and then they go
Yeah.
anyway.
It's the same as the scene that you said after the ships are blown up. If they just had that one moment in afterwards, like the resulting events would just have more of a weight to them.
Yeah, 100%. But I want to switch from something I like you said, we had our issues within Numenor, to something I thought was just like, it's such a small scene, but in terms of its importance for later seasons, I thought it was so well done, which was the scene between Pharazôn and Kemen.
Yeah.
Um, where they're discussing. Kemen's trying to say, why would we go to Middle Earth for the elves? Why would we take elves' orders? I mean, I loved that Pharazôn could send all these people away with just a look. It's a really great, subtle way of showing his power. But then when he talks about this idea that, listen, Miriel can go to war for the elves if she wants, I'm looking long term, and I'm seeing trade, I'm seeing tribute, I'm seeing or I'm seeing forests. I'm seeing the material gain we could get for Numenor. And obviously, having read the books, we know that that is where the Numenorians end up kind of really showing their decline in the way they go from saviors and friends to the men of Middle Earth, to conquerors, imperialists, and even to the extent that they become slavers. So that scene worked so well for me. I don't know if you enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, I really do. Like, I find a lot of the moments that really resonate with me in the show are these kind of small discussions between like a few characters, you know, one, two, three characters. Well, obviously not one character because then they'd be talking to themselves.
Mm.
Two, three characters, you know, they have such an impact on, you know, not just the viewer, but like the bigger story, as you said. And I really appreciate the way they're kind of building up Farazan's character, but not, you know, they're treating us like the audience like we're smart. You know, they're not hitting us over the head with this, oh, he's gonna betray Miriel one day, blah blah blah. We can just infer it, and I like that he's kind of continued this trend of implicating that Miriel is the one who's making these decisions. You know, she can go to the war for the elves. In the last episode, it was, you know, this is the Queen Regent's decision. He's kind of separating himself from the decision while also talking about the things that they can get out of it that would kind of resonate more with the men of Numenor. So I just really like the kind of subtlety but menace that's being brought to his character at the moment.
Yeah, there's a look he gives Kemen after he says taking orders from elves, and he sort of does this half smile, half chuckle, but there's this look of just. He almost looks like he wants to hit his son. And, obviously I'm not asking for the show to make, Pharazôn some kind of abusive father who beats his son. But there's almost this look behind the eyes like, what did you just say? Like, do you
Yeah.
realize, like, you can tell the very thought of someone suggesting that really gets to him deep down. And I love subtle moments like that. I think Tristan Gravel is knocking it out the park. And I also really like that when he was discussing with Miriel after the ships blew up, he says, maybe we should delay the departure until we can win more sport. It also shows that he is a very canny politician. He's looking at it and saying, listen, if they're willing, even though he doesn't know it's Kemen, he's saying, if they're willing to blow up ships to stop us, public opinion could be in such a bad place where the rulers of this kingdom could be in danger. So he's already thinking, I'm trying to increase my position. If Miriel comes under threat from the public, well, I'm her right hand. Who do you think they're going to, if there's a Viva la Revolution moment, his head's going to be on the chopping block as well. So I really liked those subtle moments where we just got to see how complex a character and how smart Farazan is. I think that has been done really well.
Yeah.
I don't know, the scene with Miriel and her father, I didn't think gave me that much, but I wonder whether that's going to be one of those scenes that becomes important in hindsight. Like, I don't know what's going to happen exactly to Miriel when she's in Middle-earth. I don't know if something's going to happen to her father while she's in Middle-earth. And so that was one of those scenes where I was like, that was an odd scene to throw in there. But maybe it's one of those scenes that has a greater payoff down the line.
Yeah, I think it's probably a scene that we're going to call back to at some point, because my first thought was, they put it in and then she didn't change her mind. So I was like, what was the point? That was kind of pointless. But I feel like they wouldn't put that in for it to not mean anything, especially because, when I think it's Galadriel, Farazan, and Miriel are talking, she mentioned, we have your father's support or something like that.
Yeah, blessing,
And
yeah.
Miriel, so I don't think they would put it in just for it to be there. So I hope that it's something that we call back to. I do like the idea of something happening while she's away, because we can tell that she's already struggling with this decision. Something like that would only make her regret it when she gets back.
Yeah, agreed. Now, we do have to talk about Halbrand. I know you're not his biggest fan, but that's kind of why I'm interested on getting your take, because I'll be honest, one of my favorite scenes of the episode, and actually of the season, was that conversation between Halbrand and Galadriel in the Forge. I thought it was the culmination of all the work these two actors have been putting into their scenes, all the interactions we've seen leading up to now. We're all building up to that moment of a mutual recognition of pain, of loss, of fear, of this uncertainty about their future, both in very different ways. Halbrand's running away, Galadriel's running towards something, but they are both running from their past. And I just thought it really worked for me. And I know you haven't been Halbrand's biggest fan, but I'd really like to get whether that scene landed for you as well.
I don't think it had as much of an impact on me as it had on other people, because like you said, and like a lot of other people have said, it was their, I don't know, you said it wasn't your standout, but it was a lot of people's standout moment in the episode. I think I had other moments that resonated with me more, but it was such a well done scene. And I think in one of my previous appearances, I said I was kind of hoping that episode 2 wasn't the culmination of Galadriel and Halbrand's relationship. They didn't trust each other at the start. They respect each other at the end. I was like, it doesn't feel earned. But this being the culmination of that I thought that would be, it feels so much better. Their relationship was kind of like up and down, and then they got to this point where everything was just kind of laid out, and it made Halbrand's decision to come along feel, it had that weight behind it. And not to kind of fuel the Halbrand Sauron rumors, but there were moments during that scene where I was kind of like scared of him. Like he was so, I'm not going to say menacing, but there was just something there where I was like, oh, okay, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think what they did was, which I thought was a great piece of directing, was as he was coming towards Galadriel, when, he kind of loses his, he's frustrated with her that she won't leave him be.
Yeah.
They shoot it from, I guess, what's called like an upshot, where he's shot from below. So we're almost seeing him menacing over us, and he's moving towards the camera. So it's this sense that he's bearing down not on Galadriel, but on also us as the audience. I mean, that whole scene was done. Yeah, that whole scene was directed perfectly. Like, as far as I'm concerned, just really got to shout out Wayne Yip for that. Fantastic. As for the Halbrand is Sauron, okay, I'll tell you where I am with it now.
Okay.
I basically have this issue. There is a lot of evidence that Halbrand is Sauron. His ability to sway people with words, the fact he's running from his past, the fact he, seems to have this obsession with smithing, and like you say, there's that sense of violence and menace under it, which we first saw in the street fight, and then we saw a bit more of it in this week's episode. I'll say my problem with it. My issue with it is that it still doesn't make sense to me that Sauron tries to get to Numenor the way he did. If it turns out he is Sauron, again, like, I know I've been saying this for 5 weeks. People must be so bored of me saying it, but like, it just doesn't make sense to me that that's how Sauron tried to get to Numenor. It doesn't make sense he'd try and save Galadriel, because people forget he knew who she was by the time she falls off the raft and is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. So there's like no reason there for me to think that Sauron would save Galadriel. And we've got a question that I'll ask later. But my other problem with it is, I guess this isn't a problem with that, but my then counter problem and why I'm so conflicted is, and I think it was Mercury Reads on Twitter who said this either to me or in one of their tweet threads. They said, if he's not Sauron, why are they giving all of Sauron's attributes to him? The manipulative, the ability to sweet talk people, the smithing, the violence and darkness inside. So like, that's my issue, is like, I see a lot of the evidence for it. That's the issue for me, that if he's not Sauron, why give him all the attributes? But for me, I don't like that he would be Sauron. And furthermore, like, I know I said this to you on last week's episode, I think there's a much more interesting character arc for him to go on if he ends up, whether he's a ring wraith, the king of the dead, whoever. I just think it's more interesting. But where are you at on the Halbrand is Sauron theory?
Still unchanged. I don't like it. If he's a red herring, then hats off to the writers, because they have so many people convinced. And even the people like me and you who don't agree with the theory, there's still like a lot of things where we're like, how do we explain this away? So I think the kind of mystery they've created around him is really well done. But like I said before, I'm still very much on team Sauron is already in Eregion. Working behind the scenes, I think that would just be so much more of an interesting way to reveal him. Or even if he is revealed through Adar and that storyline, I think both those angles would just be a lot more interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I did quickly want to raise one of the questions we got from our listeners. So this question comes to us from Mile High Brendan, who asks, if Halbrand is Sauron, doesn't that mean either, one, that he isn't that everything is a deliberate deception Anatar we were accepting, but rather a genuinely conflicted Sauron, or two, the episode 5 conversation with Galadriel, which visually exuded total sincerity, was a cheap cinematic cheat? Okay, here's where I come down on that, and then I'll kind of throw it over to you. So if he is Sauron, the deliberate deception rather than the genuinely conflicted. Okay, here's what I'll say. And this idea that his conversation with Galadriel wasn't totally sincere. Again, my issue is here, he asks who Galadriel lost. She says her brother. He asks how did he die, and Galadriel has to explain he was killed by the servants of Sauron. Sauron was responsible for Finrod's death. So, like, I don't even know why he'd ask that. Like, fair enough if he was playing along, he might ask, oh, who did you lose? But I don't see a reason why he would then get her to explain how he died. Like, it's all a little bit contrived. As for the idea that a genuinely conflicted Sauron, I don't mind Sauron having depth, but I don't think it's right that given Sauron is about to convince Celebrimbor to forge the rings, it doesn't make sense for him to be conflicted at that later stage in his story. That's where I come to on it.
Yeah, I just think that would be too much of a deviation from his character for me to be happy with it. And it's like you said, even this kind of deceiving Sauron, he would have to be perfect in his plans to somehow have ended up meeting Galadriel and kind of progressing this journey the way he did. So it just, yeah, I'm not a fan of that whole thing.
Yeah, like, you read the Silmarillion and Sauron isn't perfect, like, in terms of his ability to enact an evil plan. Like, he gets bodied by Huan, sorry. in the Beren and Luthien story, he makes a lot of mistakes. Even in the story of the Second Age, he faces several defeats. He's not perfect. So this idea that, like, again, it's just way too convoluted for me. We've got a question we're going to return to at the end of the show about this idea of Sauron being remorseful and repentant, but we'll save that to the end. Let's move into the Southlands, and I'm actually going to start with a bit of a fun question, because Tea with Tolkien, who we both know on Twitter, and you both share what could I say, an admiration for Adar. You're both big fans of his, and especially Joseph Moore. Tea with Tolkien asks, did Anna's opinion of Adar change after this episode, or are you still, and this is my postscript to that question, or are you still just too head over heels for him that you can't have a rational thought about him?
Yes. But I'll make my answer longer. He's just, when his character was first announced, my biggest issue with him was the name, which I've grown to love. Great kind of way to tie him in with the orcs.
Yeah.
I was so ready to accept him as this kind of one season villain to introduce, the bigger villain who is probably going to be Sauron. I don't like that anymore. I don't want him to go. I'm hoping that he's kind of a 2-season villain at most, but he's just, and this is where kind of I struggle to put him into rational thoughts, but he's just such an amazing villain so far. And, all the confidence that I was like, oh yeah, I have so much confidence that he's going to be great. And that's why they've kind of withheld him. I stand by that. I think he's great. And he's not had too much screen time, compared to a lot of the other characters, but he's done so much with what he has. And I think just in general, the orcs as well, they're just so well done, and they feel like kind of grounded, not kind of fleshed out characters, because they're not, but you can feel their presence whenever they're on screen. And I have to talk about the Nampat song, because oh my gosh, I have been listening to it on repeat. Like, why do the villains always have the best music? It's so good. It's so good. I want, like, I didn't think, and this isn't me like being sympathetic to their cause, they are the villains, we've established that, but they're so cool that every time I'm on screen, I'm like, I don't want you to be defeated yet. Like, I want you to carry on doing your villainy things, because it's so cool.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And it's weird, I agree with you. Like, I'd love for Joseph Moore to come back for season 2. He's so dynamic, he's got so much screen presence. And one of the things it's made me realize, especially after this episode, whoever's playing Sauron has got a tough act to follow, because you've got to follow some of my favorite scenes. That scene near the start of the episode where he's just basking in the sun, and then he has that interaction with the orc about what the sunlight feels like and how he's actually going to miss it because it's a part of himself that he's going to be killing as part of his evil plan to, create this realm of darkness, which again, very Sauron coded language. But then also that later scene where Waldreg comes with the deserting Southlanders, pledges his allegiance to Sauron, and Adar just, my God, the way Joseph Moore portrayed that with small facial movements as he's walking away, then he hears Sauron's name and he just stops and then he turns around. And as he's walking towards him, you can almost, they did a brilliant thing of, as he's walking towards Waldreg after he's heard this, they've got him backlit by all the fire in the background as we're getting him walking in profile. And it's like you can see that fire raging inside him until he goes up and, obviously kind of slams Waldreg to the ground. What did you think of that scene? Because I had a couple of theories about why he responds that way on my Sunday episode, but I kind of wanted to get your take on it.
Okay, 1, amazing scene. 2, I never thought I would be jealous of Waldreg, but here we are.
Oh my
3.
God, Anna.
And here's my action point now.
I would just like to say for everyone listening, that still qualifies as a PG-13 comment, but do feel free to bully Anna in the comments, because that was an unheard of level of Adar simping on this podcast. Anyway, carry on with your point after you just said you would like Adar to choke slam you to the ground, but please carry on.
Yeah, so here's my actual point. Okay, now I need to collect myself because I've forgotten my actual point. Okay, I've got it now. So I think it was last episode maybe, we spoke about, what is Adar's role in the bigger story? What does he want? And, I spoke a little bit about how when he kind of says he's not a god yet, he's kind of placing himself above Sauron in a way. And that feels kind of consolidated by this storyline. I don't know, it might just be my own theory, but it was this anger when Waldreg thought he was Sauron, as if, and my takeaway from it was he wanted Waldreg to be pledging allegiance to him. He
Mm.
was all for it until Sauron was mentioned, and that's when he kind of snapped. And it felt like just this visceral, subconscious reaction. He didn't really think about it. It was just pure anger. And I do like kind of the idea of him wanting to be where Sauron is or even above him, because I think in a way that sets up Sauron to kind of come in and maybe take that away from him. I think we did speak about this.
Yeah, it's super interesting to me. I basically had a couple of thoughts on it. One was if he is a corrupted elf, which I think is the most likely explanation given his armor, given everything else we know about him, given all his previous dialogue, I wonder whether his resentment towards Sauron is A, because he was maybe captured and tortured and corrupted by Sauron. And so rather than Morgoth himself being the one who corrupted Adar, it was Sauron. And so maybe he has that resentment because his life of pain started with Sauron. Or, like you said, he sees himself as Morgoth's true successor. And for that reason, like you said, he wanted that pledge to beat him. I do think it raises a couple of interesting questions if that's the case. It would be incredibly ambitious. It would almost be Feanorian, one might say, to place yourself as an elf on the same level as a Maiar. Like, that is an incredible statement of ambition and arrogance to think that you could stand on the same level, because we know from the Silmarillion that the only other beings that really saw themselves on the same level as Sauron under Morgoth were the Balrogs, because the Balrogs were also Maiar who were corrupted by Morgoth. So while they would follow Sauron in some cases, he was really first among equals. So I really like the idea, and it's interesting to think about why an elf would have that ambition. The only other idea I have, and I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of this theory. I don't know if there are any people at all who think that Adar is Sauron, but it is a kind of nice little lore Easter egg that if he was Sauron, that he reacts so negatively to being called that name, because as we know from the Silmarillion, Sauron was a name given to him by the elves, and it means vile or horrible or something like that in Quenya, whereas all the names he gives himself, like Myron, which means the Admirable, or Anatar, Lord of Gifts. So it would be interesting to think about if he was Sauron, but yeah, I mean, I don't know where you are, but I think I'm still on the thought that he is just a corrupted First Age elf.
Yeah, I'm still team corrupted elf too. And another kind of thing I'm excited to see play out in regards to this plot line is his relationship with the orcs, because we've established they literally call him father, and in some cases Lord Father. So if there was a moment, later on in this series, maybe even in series 2, when that allegiance was tested, if Sauron came in, because in a sense this could be who they're all working for, who the orcs side with.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's kind of settled for us in this episode that he's not a lieutenant of Sauron's, like, quite clearly. Like, he wouldn't have reacted that badly if he were working for Sauron. So it's very clear to me he's not working directly for him. But I love that point you make about the fact the orcs refer to him as Lord Father. And actually that he has this slightly more gentle, I mean, it's not completely gentle. He still forced an orc to
Yeah.
burn his arm, for his kind of, so that he would monologue. But there is that more tender relationship, and I wonder whether that's part of the evolution of the orcs within the show's storyline, that under Adar they have a bit more of a sense of culture, of identity, because he's a father figure to them in a spiritual sense. And then when Sauron comes in, and as Sauron does throughout all of Tolkien's stories, he dominates through sheer force of will. in that way, maybe that's where we see the transformation of the orcs into losing what tiny part of their identity they have left, and instead just being these kind of these thralls, these, objects of war for Sauron to throw at his enemies. And I think that would be like, if the show decides to go that route, I will stand up and give them a round of applause, because that is such a nuanced and interesting way to look at Tolkien's idea of orcs.
Yeah, because that moment in episode 4 when he's first introduced, sorry, they kind of all blur into one. I try and pinpoint which thing happened when, when he kind of stabs the orc to take him out of his misery. There's genuine relief and happiness on the orc's face when he's looking at Adar. It's not just this kind of, he's my leader, he's, taking me out of my pain. It's like you can feel this father figure dynamic. Like you can kind of get the sense of why they call him that. So I think if the way, like you said, they played out like that would just be absolutely incredible, because the orcs are like, they feel so nuanced already in this show. They're not mindless. We can kind of feel the reason for what they're doing. They want to please Adar, and it's not even just they want to please him as soldiers. It feels more personal.
Definitely. In the interest of time, we do also need to talk about the other development we got in the Southlands, which is, the scenes at the old watchtower, the revelation of the sword being some kind of key. Let me preface my kind of question to you to get some of your thoughts by, we got a question from our good friend Matt, who goes by Tree Herder on Twitter, who said, it's a bit of a spoilery question, but who do you think is supposed to be on the receiving end of the blade in the stone carving in Ostirith? Is it just any old bloke? If it was the stranger, could he be integral to the eruption of Orodruin? The blade being a key has led me to believe that the person being on the receiving end of the stabbing, the sword, the sacrifice, shouldn't be random. So I guess I'd love to get your general thoughts on those scenes we got with Arondir and Theo and the sword, but also what you think about that idea of there being a specific person in mind for that sword to sacrifice. What do you think?
I like so far the way Theo, didn't go with Waldreg. We knew he wouldn't, but he has that support from Arondir and Bronwyn. And, I think I mentioned this last time, I kind of hope that he gets tempted by the darkness, but ultimately isn't, doesn't give into it. And the build-up of these bonds with Arondir and Bronwyn, I'm really enjoying, the kind of moments between them, especially when, Arondir and Bronwyn kind of hatch this plot of how to, deal with the situation, and they come out having this kind of fake argument. I enjoyed that scene a lot. And as for the statue thing, my first thought was actually Addo, which I know in hindsight doesn't make a lot of sense, but sacrifice he talks about, we thought there might be a tie with Sauron. That immediately kind of blipped. I was like, no. But honestly, I have no idea who it could be other than Halbrand. I guess it would fit in the context of the story, but I don't know how that would play out really.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, when Matt asked that question, my immediate thought was, I have absolutely no idea, because the carving is just a generic person, right, being stabbed through with the sword.
Yeah, it doesn't feel specific from just seeing it.
No, it doesn't. But I like your idea of it being Halbrand, of it needing to be, the kind of blood of Southland royalty. That would be a really cool idea. The Stranger, I think, and we'll get on to the Stranger in a moment, because we're going to talk about the Harfoot storyline as our last storyline in this episode. But I think that only works if the Mystics, who again we'll talk about, are in league with Adar, which I don't think is likely, but who knows? I could be wrong there. I don't think it's so important who's being sacrificed. I think it's just more important that what we're being told in the visual language of the show is that the blade is not really a weapon. It's an almost, if not religious, then it's a sacrosanct object. It is for the purpose of this sacrifice. It's a ritual blade. I don't know whether it's going to be the key to the eruption of Orodruin. Maybe. It's definitely the storyline that's got me raising my eyebrows the most. But yeah, I think, I don't know that we have a solid answer to that, so maybe let's move on from that. But I will say I absolutely adored the scene with Arondir and Theo, where he was talking about Theo having got courage in the time it took, Arondir 200 years to build that courage. I just love that. And I know I mentioned this on Twitter in last week's pod, but I have to say again, as soon as I saw that, all I could think about was in Peter Jackson's The Two Towers, when Aragorn has that scene with the young boy Haleth on the eve of the Battle of Helm's Deep, and he tells him, that there's always hope and that you should have courage and that this is a good blade. It felt like a really lovely callback to that, even though that is, in the same way this is, an invented scene for the adaptation.
Yeah, it's like I said, there were so many like touching moments in this episode. There was that moment about courage and hope, and then we talked about it before, but Gil-galad's quote, "Hope is never mere, Elrond, even when it's meager." It's just, there were so many lovely character moments, and it kind of calls back to what I said about some of my favorite moments being these smaller conversations between just a few characters. They have so much impact on me. And in regards to Theo, I do think he's going to have something to do with the key unlocking, because we've seen that he can kind of activate the sword with his blood. And I guess it kind of hasn't really been confirmed whether anyone else can do it yet. So whether it's him specifically who can do it or kind of his bloodline, and maybe that relates to Halbrand possibly being his father, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, and I do actually just want to touch on, because I feel like we didn't give it enough time, the through line in this episode of hope against despair, courage against doubt, which, is really like, if you boil down some of Tolkien's key themes across all his works, not just the Silmarillion or the Lord of the Rings, this idea of hope in the darkest moment and having courage and not despairing. I loved actually that we had that moment of Arondir talking to Theo about courage, which, as you said, parallels Gil-galad's line about hope. And actually, we should just stop and say, for all the people complaining about Gil-galad's portrayal, I think it says a lot that they chose to give that line to Gil-galad. Then they're clearly not making Gil-galad some just scheming politician. Like, the fact he is the one to remind Elrond of the value of hope is really special. And I know I'm getting tangential again, but what I loved as well about that scene is that after he said to Elrond about hope, Elrond looks up at the stars, which we know he does when he's thinking about his father. We then get the transition to Númenor of his father Eärendil's statue, and in the background of that scene you can actually see Eärendil's star hanging in the sky. And as I said on Twitter, the star of Eärendil is called Gilestel, which means the Star of High Hope. So there is this beautiful through line throughout the episode of hope being the answer and hope being the best weapon in the fight against the darkness. So I really like that. One thing I did want to get your take on was that Bronwyn actually seems to flirt with the darkness, in this episode. And it has got me wondering if it's actually in the end going to be her, not Theo, that falls to the darkness. And I like that they've introduced that as something for us to ponder.
I guess I could kind of see it in the context of maybe her trying so hard to save Theo from the darkness that she somehow falls into it instead. But I don't know. I don't see that happening to her. But, they've kind of set up this relationship between Arondir and Bronwyn. And, it's very Tolkien to have this doomed relationship. So, maybe something will happen to one of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just wanted to answer a quick extra question we got from Tiana, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Tiana Byers, who asked, was there a missing scene between Arondir kind of being beaten up in the last episode and then cleaned up Arondir now with some armor again? Where did he get that armor? Did Bronwyn... the question ends, did Bronwyn use her healing skills on him? Why didn't we see this? Women want to know. Listen, I would have loved to have seen a scene of Arondir getting all cleaned up. As for the armor, I think it's probably just likely that given they're back at the Watchtower, there was some old abandoned armor there, because as we know, that Watchtower was abandoned by them, and it seemed to be a breastplate that had a big crack down the left-hand side, so I assume it's just an old, slightly beaten down piece of armor. But yeah, sure, would have loved to see Arondir taking kind of having a wash. Anywho, we'll talk about predictions for next week's episode, so I'm not going to ask about anything else to do with the Southlands. let's move on to our final storyline. And oh my God, I said last week that I was glad to have a break from the Harfoots because it allowed other storylines to breathe, but my God, did I love having them back this episode. They were just one of the highlights, and I know exactly what we're going to talk about first. And luckily, one of our listeners asked a question about it. I know what I think about this. I think I know what you think about this. But Francis asks, what did you think of the This Wandering Day sequence? Anna?
It made me cry. Like,
Same.
oh my gosh, it felt like everything we think of when we think of hobbits, that lovely like feeling that you get when you just think of hobbits. It felt like that. Megan Richards' voice is just amazing. It was so like soothing on top of it, but it was so emotional, especially the last part with the stranger. There's this moment where they kind of hand him, I think it's like a cup of something that they're all sitting around and drinking, and they include him in it. And then Nori watching him just look up at the sky with, the not all who wander or wander are lost over the top. It was just my favorite part of the episode, hands down. It made me so emotional, but it was just such a lovely scene. Like, the only way I can describe it is like it was just so warm.
Mm. Yeah, it was the exact same for me. The moment where I knew I was going to cry was, as you said, when they're all sitting in the caravan. It's pouring with rain outside. There's lightning. They're all laughing, smiling. They hand him a cup, and it seems like a really warm moment, and it is. But then he turns and he peers his face out the kind of, I guess the door or the blanket covering the outside of the caravan, and he's looking out into the rain, and it was one of those great cinematic moments where, are there tears, or is it just the rain on his face? And then the transition of that, as you said, to Nori being in the field and looking at him. I haven't been able to describe it, but there's a brilliant little thing Markella Kavanagh does when we get the shot of her looking at the stranger standing on the top of the hill looking up at the stars, and she almost kind of raises her eyebrows for half a second as if she's about to go, oh, that's weird, that's curious. And then this look on her face settles of just pure observance and
Yeah.
silent kind of watchfulness. And having that paired with the lines about at last comes the answer that not all who wander or wander are lost. I said this on last week's episode, and I'm actually I'm getting a little bit emotional talking about it now, but I think it's one of those themes in Tolkien we can all relate to, this idea of feeling lost, of feeling unsure of what we're meant to be doing with ourselves, unsure of what our purpose and our journey is, and yet having to carry on, and carrying on in spite of that. And it was the idea of the stranger feeling so alone that he's looking up at the stars because he's trying to find where he belongs. Yeah, it was just like I said, it's an incredibly emotional scene, and yeah, I literally, I've been thinking about it for 4 days now, and I still don't have the words for it. It was one of those TV magic moments for me.
It really was like everything about it, the music, the acting, because they didn't speak. And so the acting was purely like physical. It was just incredible. The shot of the stranger looking at the sky, it felt so lonely, kind of the deep blues and his figure just in the middle. Like, it felt so lonely, but then with the song over the top and Nori behind him, it was kind of that sense that whether he knows it or not, the Harfoots are with him and he has that support no
Mm,
matter how lost he feels. It was so Tolkien. And it's moments like this where I'm like,
yeah.
even the people who think that the show is really, really diverting from Tolkien, they keep to his core. And I think it was Don Marshall, he interviewed, John Howe, the artist who does a lot of work for Tolkien and his adaptations. And he had a really good quote from that interview where he said something like, the most important part of an adaptation is keeping to the spirit of something. And I think that The Rings of Power just does
Mm.
that so well. It has that core spirit of Tolkien. And like you said, this episode was, finding hope in the darkness. And it threaded through the episode so well.
Yeah, no. So I'm almost lost for words, and it's because I think, like you say, this is the moment where all my concerns about the Mithril storyline, some of my complaints about how Numenor's been handled, my issues with Celebrimbor, it just all fades away. It's like it's like dust in the wind to me. I just don't care, because
Yeah.
when you have a scene like that, for me, it's a lot like in the Hobbit films, where we get that scene where Bilbo finds Sting, and Gandalf has that lovely speech to him about saying, Bilbo says, I've never swung a sword, I've never had to take a life," and Gandalf says, and I hope you never do, because true courage is not when to take a life, it's knowing when to spare it. And like, even though the Hobbit films have issues, I see a moment like that, and I just think, God, I almost don't care, because I got that scene, and it moves me so emotionally. And it was the same thing here, I think. I've said it since I started talking about this on Twitter and then on the podcast. I agree 100%. What matters to me is the spirit. Does it feel like it's embodying the key themes and ideas that motivated Tolkien's writings? And I think it does 100%.
Yeah, it's definitely, like I said at the start, I had my issues with this episode, and I do feel bad because I have ragged on certain parts of it, but I want to be honest about how I feel, going into the show. I'm not going to pretend that I like everything about it, but moments
Mm,
like that just are so touching, and there were so many different things in this episode that kind of got me for a second, and they just made me so emotional. Like you said before, I was getting emotional just thinking about that scene.
mm.
It's just, yeah, like all my concerns fly away when I see things like that. And I'm like, okay, there's so much more going for the show than there isn't. So, yeah, I have my issues that I like to talk about, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just an incredible show.
It's funny, because I didn't think 5 episodes into this show, me and you would be sitting on a podcast getting very emotional, about the stranger and the Harfoots, and it's like I said, it's just resonated with me so much, and
Yeah.
I'm forever grateful that they included this in the show. But to get us back on topic, and so I don't become a blubbering mess, obviously a big part of this episode was the stranger saving the Harfoots from the kind of boar wolves creatures, and then him trying to heal his arm and accidentally hurting Nori. So I kind of want to prompt us with this question from Joe Schonbach, who asks: grey-bearded stranger draped in a grey blanket, uses magic and has a soft spot for halflings. Is there any reasonable doubt that this is Gandalf? What do you think?
My thing with The Stranger is, and something that I think they've done so well, is that we know absolutely nothing about him. And yet, 5 episodes in, I'm getting emotional over a shot of him just looking at the sky.
Mm,
If they've done anything, it's make me care about him. And I've got to the point in caring about him where I don't really theorize about who he is anymore. If he is Gandalf, I think, I can see why people have issues with that kind of placing him at this moment in time. But like you said, this kind of relationship with the Harfoots and the Greybeard and everything. But it could be Gandalf, it could be a blue wizard, it could even be Saruman. I hope it isn't, but it could be. Or he could just be a completely original character. And I
yeah.
care that, they've got me to care about him enough at this point that if he's an original character, that's fine with me because I I already like him enough for that to just be acceptable.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I mean, like I tweeted out today, I'm still on Team Blue Wizard, but that's less to do with evidence. It's more just because I really like it. If we could get an adaptation of the Blue Wizard story, I think that's really interesting to me. But I also tweeted out today that quote from The Two Towers, where I think it's Gimli's asking about Treebeard and the Ents, and he says, are they dangerous? And Gandalf says, dangerous, and so am I, very dangerous, more dangerous than anything you will ever meet, unless you are brought alive before the seat of the Dark Lord. And I thought that was a really nice parallel to the opening, where the stranger thinks he's a danger. He says, I'm peril
Yeah.
to Nori, and she refers him that he's good because he's trying to help. And I love that duality to his character. As for the evidence in this episode, I will say it made me feel like if I were to be speculating, then I would say this episode did make me think it was more likely he was Gandalf, just
Yeah.
based on some of his actions and, like I said, things like that quote. But as I think we both said this last week, like it's not that I don't care, but I'm so much more invested in his character that I don't really mind who he is. If he's Gandalf, if he's a blue wizard, if he's an original Maya of some kind, you know. The only thing I wouldn't like, which I know we joked about last week, is that I've now actually decided I don't want him to be a bad character. I don't want him to be
No,
Sauron. I don't want him to be a Balrog. Like,
me
there's
neither.
just too much emotional work that's gone in for me to then, like, have that taken away.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what this episode did well was the visual storytelling. And,
Mm,
I think we've theorized from the start that he is a good person, but he's so powerful and he doesn't understand that power yet. And that shot we got, when Nori's kind of hidden, kind of thinking, like, what the hell just happened? And he's kind of turns around from where he's just been stood, trying to heal his arm. And he just kind of
mm,
approaches her weakly, and you can just see the fear on her face. It was just a wonderful shot, and it
yeah.
it kind of makes me more confident in this. He's good, but he's just so powerful that he doesn't like realize his own danger at this point. Because you can tell that
Yeah.
he's remorseful about what he does. He doesn't, actively want to hurt Nori. He can't help it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think what was interesting, I got a question from Artanaro who asked, what's your take on the blackening injury of the stranger's hand? And I know some people said, like, oh, is that the evil trying to get out? I don't think it's that. I think it's that very literal thing of him being so powerful that when he's not in control, trying to use that is hurting himself as well as others.
Yeah.
So I think that's more where they're going. Moving on from the stranger, I guess, to the Harfoot's future, we got two questions, one from Middle Earth Theory and one from Yvonne Margeau, and they're both kind of asking the same questions. They're asking, this Harfoot Grove they're going towards, they're heading for this orchard. Middle Earth Theory says, do we think it will have Entwives? Because the description of this grove sounds a lot like what Treebeard said about Entwives preferring smaller plant life, such as fruit, trees, flowers, and vegetables. And Yvonne asked, as the second part of their question, what are the chances it's in future Ithilien? I'll answer the second part, and then I want to get your take on the Entwives idea. I don't think it's in Ithilien, only because from the map it looks like they're heading much further east and to the north of Mordor, almost as if they're heading towards Rune, which we'll come to in a second. But yeah, what do you think about this idea that the grove they're heading towards is connected to those Ents we either saw in the first episode or, Entwives more generally?
I'm going to be completely honest that I have no idea if it would work lore-wise, but I would love it if there were Entwives there. I know from at least a trailer, I can't remember if we saw it in the actual episode, but there was what seemed to be like an Ent child, or just like a very small Ent being hugged by a
Yeah,
taller Ent.
yeah, I think we got that in the scene of the meteor coming down, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I don't want that to just be like a tease, like, oh, here are the
Mm.
Ents. I want to see them. They're such like a big part of Tolkien. They're the Entwives. They're such. We only hear of them in Lord of the Rings, and I think it would be really nice to see them.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to see them. As for like how it would work for the law, we know that the Entwives supposedly were living in these great forests in this kind of more eastern southern part of Middle Earth, and I think, and to be fair, I don't have the text in front of me, but my understanding is that that Treebeard basically says, or Tolkien says in one of his writings, that this area is the area that kind of gets brutalized by Sauron once he, wages war in the Second Age, or is also part of the area that the Númenóreans kind of, there's this period of mass deforestation in Middle Earth, basically between Sauron's wars and between the Númenóreans being kind of colonizers and imperialists, and they just chop down huge swathes of forest. So I think it would be nice to include them, because then we'll have that emotional tie when we see this this desecration of the natural land. But yeah, super interesting idea there. Moving to the last part of the Harfoot's Stranger storyline, we obviously got our first look at the Mystics. Woo-wee! We got Bridie Sisson and the rest of the gang. And I'll lead you in with a question from one of our listeners, Fred, who said, did what you guys saw of the Mystics this episode give you any insights into what they could want with the Stranger? Would enjoy some theory crafting on this. I feel like it's been overshadowed by Mithril Gate. By the way, Mithril Gate, great name for this rather overblown controversy about the Linden storyline. Anna, what are your thoughts on the Mystics? Did you get any more sense of who they were from the episode, or still as big a mystery after that one scene?
Yeah, sorry to disappoint on the theory crafting front, but I honestly have absolutely no idea. If anything, I come out of it more confused about the role they're going to play. And I'm slightly disappointed with the way they were revealed because apart from, a few extra moments, all we got were the scenes we've already seen in the trailer, which is just more in context now. I did see a really good theory and I can't remember who it was from. I'll have a look after this.
Okay, let me guess. Is it the theory? Because this was another listener question. Erin Lascallon asks, "What do you think of the Higgy Baby, which is another Twitter username's theory that the three mystics and the three wargs are linked, or perhaps the same after a quick bit of shapeshifting and werewolves working for Sauron?"
That is exactly what I was gonna say. I don't know how it would work in terms of the timeline because they were at the the crater where the stranger fell, and I'm not sure exactly how far the Harfoots have traveled, but it's far. So depending on if those two things were happening simultaneously, it wouldn't make sense. But if there was kind of a bit of a timeline shift around, I think it would be an alright theory. Because the wolves, they weren't, whether it was just like a natural instinct to be scared of the stranger, they backed away and they left. They didn't carry on pursuing them. But then again, he did like slam his hand on the ground and send them flying back. So I feel like anyone would probably get out of there.
Yeah, I think what's caused people to do this is, and I'm not really criticizing the show for this because it's tiny, but like it's a little bit sloppy to have the wolves, or I think they look like boars. I don't know why everyone's saying. I know Nori refers to them as wolves, but they look much more like wild boars to me. Anyway, when we first see them in episode 1, when they're all in the blackberry garden and eating, and then they find the footprint. That is where they originally are in episode 1. By the time we see them, as you said, they've gone on quite the trek of their migration. We see it on the map. So it is strange to me it's the same creatures bothering them in this decrepit forest. But my theory, I guess, is like if that were to work, it doesn't really work, like you said, with that kind of timeline, but it is weird that it's the same wolves. I don't know. I get the feeling the mystics are mystical in a religious and kind of sorcery sense. I don't think they're mystical creatures. As to answer the original question, which was, any insights. So I've got a couple of insights. One, if you notice, when we get the shot of the mystics from behind, the one that carries the plate, and I think she's referred to in the credits as she's either the nomad or the ascetic, or ascetic. I'm not sure exactly how that word is pronounced. On the back of her big silver kind of plate, ceremonial plate type thing she's carrying, there is the same symbol of the constellation that the stranger was searching for. So that's interesting. That makes me think that they're both heading the same place, but are they heading there in conflict? I would assume so. They've been set up to look like villains, in which case, why are they both heading to the same place? Or is the constellation not a symbol of a place, but instead a symbol of who the stranger is? Very interesting. Not sure about that. Now, we also know from interviews before the season aired that the Mystics are heading west from Rune. That means they're coming from east, or I guess technically like east-northeast of Mordor. So that's kind of another point in my favor for the theory that the stranger's a blue wizard, because if he was heading to Rune and to the Far East, within Middle Earth, that would make sense. And then the other point of note was that in the after episode video that they put out on Prime Video with Deadline, the writer Justin Doble said that he basically said, the audience doesn't know who the stranger is, but I can assure you that the mystics do. And they know who he is, and they won't stop until they locate him. So that's very interesting. Again, I don't have, again, theory crafting wise, I assume they're working for Sauron or for as part of a cult of Morgoth, but it's a really cool mystery. Again, I'm with you though. I'm a little bit worried they were only introduced in a very short scene in episode 5, and at most we've got 3 episodes with them. That does worry me slightly.
Yeah, and it's just, again, like, they put basically every scene we had of them so far in the trailers, so none of it felt new, I guess. But we've got 3 episodes, and I assume that they're not going to be the primary villains. We've got Adar, and he is being set up really well. So whether they're going to be maybe the season 2 villain, or I have a feeling they might just be setting up for something else. They're not going to be the primary focus.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, we're going pretty far on time, so let's do this. Let's do our ranking of the episode and overall final thoughts, and then let's cover our final broader questions from our listeners. So, Anna, last week, obviously we know that was your favorite episode of the season so far. You gave it your highest rating. I think all the listeners are assume this is going to be lower, but Anna, the question is, what rating are you going to give episode 5?
I'm stuck between an 8 and an 8.5, and the reason is because I think this is the episode I've been the most negative about, and I'm scared this is going to come through on the podcast as me just kind of being like, well, I didn't like this, and I didn't like this, and I didn't like this. But at the same time, there were so many good moments that it really just raises it up for me. Even from the Gil-galad and Elrond scene and the This Wandering Day moment, it brings it to an 8.5. So that's where I'm going to stay for now.
Okay, so here's where I think I am. I agree with you that I still think it was a really good episode, and it contained, like I said, the scene between Galadriel and Halbrand, the opening scene with the stranger to This Wandering Day. It contains some of my favorite scenes of the whole season, but I would be lying if I said that when I came out of the episode, my brain wasn't thinking about the things I didn't like. And so I think I have to bear that in mind. Now, I think I gave episode 1, the pilot, 7.5. It was either 7 or 7.5. And so the question I'm asking myself is, did I prefer this episode to episode 1? And I think the answer is yes. I still prefer it. I still think it's a really strong episode. I am going to give it a 7.75. That's what I'm going to give it.
Okay.
I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to be fair because, like, I don't think I can give it an 8 because I gave other episodes 8, but I equally don't think I can give it like a 7 or a 7.5 because, God, like, I can't like spend 20 minutes talking about how that scene with the stranger is like pure Tolkien to me, or Galadriel, and how, like, I can't discount that. And I, like, we didn't even talk about it, but like the final scene of Sailing into Dawn was incredible. Galadriel's sparring session, the music in this episode, like, there's so much to like about it.
Yeah, and it really just, I could debate for hours whether to give it an 8 or an 8.5, but I think I gave episode 1 an 8.5, and I didn't dislike it more than episode 1, and I didn't like it more than episode 1, so that's where it is for me. But I can't like put into words what differentiates it between that and episode 4, but episode 4 just felt more rounded to me. Like, I came out and I was like entirely satisfied, and like you said, I wasn't thinking about the things that I didn't like, but I was thinking about the things that I enjoyed from it. But yeah, it does say a lot about the show that the episodes where we have the most that we don't like still rank like above 7 on our scales, because there's just so much good that it's really, really hard to rank it down, because it's just hard.
Yeah, agreed. 100% agreed. Right, shall we do our final questions to end the episode?
Yes, we shall.
Okay, right. I missed this question when we talked about Lindon, but it's kind of a nice way to cap off our discussion about that plot line and Sauron more broadly anyway. So this was a question that came to us through Doran's Stable, but the original tweet was from Covington Cat 73. And they said, Did Elrond's conversation with Celebrimbor and Gil-galad make anyone else wonder if Celebrimbor brought a special guest to the Elf Lords Only Council meeting in Episode 1? Maybe the one who didn't want the son of Eärendil seeing through them and told them not to invite Elrond. Okay, I'll give you my quick thought, and you tell me whether you disagree. I like the idea, as we've already talked about, that Sauron in his Anatar form is already corrupting Celebrimbor. I don't like that he would then come to a council meeting, because the first time Gil-galad sees Anatar, he should not trust him. So while it would work for Elrond not trusting him, it wouldn't work for Gil-galad, and I don't want them to have, like, even if we find out that Anatar has been working behind the scenes, I don't want Gil-galad to have known that yet. I want that to be something Celebrimbor has kept from him. That's what I think about that. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, like, one of my main issues with the Halbrand Sauron theory is that it means he will have been able to deceive Galadriel, which we know that as Anatar he doesn't do. So it's just similar with Gil-galad. I would like it in the, it would kind of show us like how far his deception runs, that he could kind of get Elrond, disinvited to something like that. But
yeah,
it would be a disservice to Gil-galad's character, I think.
Yeah, and I still personally, I know some people don't like this, but I still really like the idea that Elrond wasn't invited to that meeting. A, because they were clearly discussing this mithril thing, but B, when they say elf lords only, it's both a reference to the fact that Elrond isn't a lord yet, and he is half-elven. And I know some people are like, oh, it's silly to, think the elves would discriminate against that, but I'm sorry, the First Age elves, the Noldrin elves, discriminating against other elves? Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't really have anything else to add.
As a follow-up to that, the original Hare asks, the idea of a repentant Sauron, textual evidence for or against, and how would this reframe who we are looking at the who is Sauron question? Okay, so fundamentally, the evidence for the fact that Sauron was repentant at one stage comes from the opening paragraph of the Rings of Power in the Third Age in the Silmarillion. And I've actually pulled it up to answer this question. And it says, when Thrangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, blah, 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 being dismayed. Anyway, and then it says, but it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order, and he commanded Sauron to return to Aman, and therefore receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so the point is that even within the canon version Tolkien says of Sauron repenting, it is a momentary thing. And he is only repenting, even if you believe that he is repenting genuinely and it's not a deceit, he only does it until the Herald of the Valar says, yeah, you've got to come back and stand trial, and you are going to have a punishment, and you're probably going to serve a sentence of repentance. He says no. So, that's why it doesn't work for me, this idea that Halbrand is Sauron, and he's in this kind of remorseful, repentant mode, because Sauron's repentance is very brief, even within the text. So I don't like it. That's where I am on it.
Yeah, I agree, and, props to you for pulling up the text. I assumed you would have been able to just recite it from memory, but apparently not. Yeah, I don't think it would fit in with the Anatar we know, and that's not to say that they can't do anything different, but it just wouldn't serve his character well. Similar to Gil-galad not being fooled by him, it would just be a disservice to what we know about the characters.
Yeah, I don't, and the thing is, I don't mind Sauron being complex. I want him to be complex. I want his motivations to be more than I'm just a bad guy. But his motivations in the Second Age, even if you unpack that, are not that he's repentant. And so it's just like, I don't think we need that at all. And because also when Sauron later surrenders to the Númenóreans, and then there's that whole storyline, again, it's not a real repentance. Yeah. And so the textual evidence says that when Sauron repents for something, it is very much not genuine. Okay, anyway, swiftly moving on. Durinul asks, do you anticipate Rhûn playing an important part of location in the future? suppose given that we've had a couple of mentions of it, now that we have seen where the Harfoots are heading and where the Mystics are coming from. So do you think we're going to, maybe season 2, 3, we're going to venture into Rhûn and get some idea of the Men of the East more fleshed out?
I think so. It's one of these things where it's like, did they mention it because Tolkien fans will be like, oh, I know where that is, it's mentioned, or did they mention it because at some point it's going to be important?
Yeah, I see both sides to it. Here's what I will say, and some Tolkien fans aren't going to like me saying this, but it would be really nice if we got to see a complex depiction of men who fell to evil in the East or in the South. Because, this isn't me about saying Tolkien was some, white supremacist. It's not that at all. Please don't think that. But you have to acknowledge to a certain extent, Tolkien has this kind of compass points of doom where the West is good and the East is bad. And, the men of Harad are darker of sin and swarthy and swarthy, and they're the ones who fall to evil. So I think the show would be right to give us that more complex view. And they've already started to do that with the Men of the Southlands, even though that's not really Harad. It's more, it's more obviously pre-Mordor. But I would like to see them do more of that. So my vote would be yes, I do think we'll see it. And I think it's a great idea. And again, it's another reason why I think including the Blue Wizards would be smart.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I hope that answer didn't cause us a bit of a storm in a teacup, so to speak.
You know what? And Tolkien fans, and this is coming from a Tolkien fan, you cannot say anything about Tolkien without at least one person having an issue with it. So, you know what? Just speak, because someone's going to have an issue with it regardless.
That's true. That's true. Good advice from Anna. If you would like to cancel her, she is at my LSR. Anyway, moving on. We got a second question from Yvonne Margeau, who asks, there's the quote, true creation requires sacrifice. But are we beginning to see who is actually going to suffer? And this is where the question gets really interesting. I'd love to hear your take on this. Are the orcs and Adar as bad as we might assume? Is there a chance that elves and Numenor might end up fighting on the wrong side? Now, I think this question has a really interesting premise, but I'm not sure my answer is going to align with it. What do you think? Are they not as bad as we might assume? Are the elves and Numenorians fighting on the wrong side?
In the grand scheme of things, I think they are the villains. It's definitely a more nuanced take. We've talked about this tenderness, the dynamic between Adar and the orcs. But at the end of the day, I think they are the villains. I don't see how they could kind of flip that onto its head when we've kind of seen these people rallying for the good. But never say never,
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I do think we're going to see the orcs suffer, but I think that is going to be under Sauron's dominion. I think the reason they gave us Adar is to show just how bad Sauron is.
Yeah.
But what I do think is really interesting about this idea is where Yvonne says, is there a chance the elves and Numenor might end up fighting on the wrong side? It's not about them fighting on the wrong side, but it is about giving a more nuanced view of what the elves and Numenor do in the Second Age. The Numenorians, yes, at first they come as saviors, but as we've discussed earlier, they later become conquerors, imperialists, colonialists. They enslave the men of Middle Earth once Sauron influences them. But even before then, they're not benevolent. And there's also this idea that the elves themselves, the elves are not just benevolent. They do things for their own purpose. And this idea that Gil-galad and the other elves probably didn't care what was happening to the men of the Southlands is absolutely, that resonates for me for what I know of Tolkien's elves. And so that's why it makes sense that it takes someone like Galadriel to actually bring that to their issue. So no, I don't think they're going to fight on the wrong side, but I do think we are going to see that the elves, the Numenorians, they're not as simple as they're the good guys, or they are the good guys, but that doesn't mean they don't make mistakes and they're not without flaws.
Yeah, it's more about nuance, I think, rather than this side's good, this side's bad. There's a defined villain and a defined hero, but they're not wholly good and they're not wholly bad.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, returning questioner. I think Charles has asked a question every episode, so this is once again Archduke Charles of Austria. Welcome, Your Highness. Asks a question actually about season 2. He says, Círdan has been confirmed for season 2. Do you think he'll play an important role in Gil-galad's future arc of becoming an actual heroic king rather than the, and this is controversial, so I'm just putting that before I finish this question, rather than the honestly paranoid, tight-lipped figure he is currently?
um, See, I disagree with the last part. I think I've said I'm not completely happy with the way they're portraying his character. There's a lot to be developed, and other characters are gonna play a part in that. But I don't know, and I didn't realize anyone had been confirmed for season two. Is there like anyone else who has that I kind of missed out on? Because I do remember they said, Celeborn and Celebrian were working on them, but I didn't realize people had been like confirmed to be in it.
Yeah, so I think the only one we had confirmed was Círdan, who in one of those weird Time magazine articles that we got like a week before the show, where we found out like the Mystics were from Rune. Like, I don't know, the producers just started dropping
Yeah.
information, and one of the pieces they said was that Círdan would be included in season two. I think we can probably expect Anarion makes an appearance in season two.
Yeah.
Celeborn, I would guess, is likely, but I don't know for sure. I guess going back to that original question, what do you think Círdan's role would be, seeing as they're introducing him as early as season two?
I don't know. I mean, I fear because of the way they've kind of treated Celebrimbor and Gil-galad in this season. My fear is that he would be there to develop Gil-galad's character and not be his own, if that makes sense. Kind of the way that Celebrimbor is with Elrond now.
Yes, yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, obviously, we know Círdan receives one of the three rings of power, so maybe that's why they need to introduce him this early on. But I think it also gives the court of Lindon, the realm of Lindon, another major figure, and that's going to be important, especially when we get to ideas like Celebrimbor actually forging the rings, what Gil-galad, Elrond, and Círdan think of that. It's going to be important once the Númenóreans, start becoming more present in season two and onwards. I also wonder whether Elendil is maybe going to strike up a friendship with Círdan in the same way that Aldarion, in the story of Aldarion and Arendis, he learns a lot of shipbuilding from Círdan. I wonder whether they're almost going to mirror that with Elendil. But I don't know. It'd be really interesting. I'm really excited to see who they cast. All I'm saying is they better give him a magnificent beard. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Any Elendil ties, good with me. Good theory.
Yeah. Okay, the next question, and I've probably caught you off guard with this one because this one took me a little bit to think about. So Ruya asks, and once again, this comes from one of the Time articles. So there was a Time magazine article before the series started airing that confirmed season 2 had an all-female directing team. Speculate on who you think and/or might be hope might be directing, assuming 8 episodes again. So the one thing I do want to say on this is that Charlotte Brandstrom, who is obviously a female director, she's directing episodes 6 and 7. So we are getting, it's not an all-male directing lineup for season 1. I don't know, to be fair, it's always hard to think of directors off the top of your head.
Yeah.
But is there anyone who comes to mind that you would like to see direct an episode? Or
I'm gonna sound like I'm just completely failing my own gender here, but I honestly have no idea. I'm sorry to all the women out there.
Yeah, it's all right. Anna is a traitor to her gender. But luckily, I the man, have come with answers. I'm going to mansplain female directors to Anna. So you can reach me at DailyROP to cancel me. But no, serious answer. I do actually have some thoughts on this, because something I've not really talked about on Twitter is that I am a bit of a film obsessive. And so I will go and watch through directors' filmographies. So I do have a couple of answers. So these are all hopes. None of these are people I think will do it, because you never know who they're able to get for series like this. So my first real hope would be Chloe Zhao. And I know it's insane to say you're going to get the Oscar-winning director of Nomadland and who directed Marvel's Eternals to come and direct. But listen, if there is one person who knows how to shoot landscapes beautifully, who knows how to frame character interactions with the camera in a very powerful way, my God, I would love to see what Chloe Zhao could do with the budget and the time and the aesthetic that Rings of Power plays with. So that would be one answer. A second answer, and this is for all of you who are familiar with some of the actors' filmography. Morvith Clark, who plays Galadriel, was in a fantastic independent British horror film called Saint Maud,
Yeah.
and I love that film. And the director of that film is by the name of Rose Glass. So I would really love if we got a bit of reverse nepotism, and Morvith was able to get Rose to come and direct an episode or two, because I think Rose has got a really interesting directing style. And as they had a horror director in the case of J.A. Bayona direct a few episodes this season, I would love to have another horror director come back. And then in terms of some other wish casting, if any of you know the films we need to talk about, Kevin or You Were Never Really Here, which is a very dark but amazing film with Joaquin Phoenix. The Scottish director Lynn Ramsey, she's incredible. I don't think she'd ever do something like this, but she's an amazing director. So yeah, in terms of film recommendations for people who want to go and look up those directors, I would say Nomadland by Chloe Zhao, You Were Never Really Here by Lynn Ramsey, although be warned, that is a very dark film. And then Saint Maud by Rose Glass, which you'll also get to see Morvith Clark in. So maybe have a look at that.
I can confirm the last one. Amazing horror film, and horror is like
Yeah.
my favorite genre. So I'm not saying that my recommendations are good, but I feel like I kind of know what I'm talking about. So great horror
Yeah.
film. Go watch it.
Yeah. And actually, if you wanted to get another horror director, I'm just going to double check their name because it's a fantastic film. Jennifer Kent, the Australian director who directed The Babadook, that's another fantastic horror film.
Yes.
I would love to see Jennifer Kent get involved. I don't know what she's doing these days, but she has a really scary horror style. Like, I feel like Rose Glasses is that slightly more abstract form of horror, but
Yeah.
but the Babadook is classic psychological horror. So yeah. Anyway, we're not a horror films podcast, at least not yet. So maybe we should move on.
Yeah, maybe. I think, like you said, the question kind of took me off guard because it's not something that I think about, when I watch the episodes, like who is kind of behind the camera. But yeah, there's like a lot to be said for the writing and directing of films. Like one of my favorite TV shows ever, ever, ever is Fleabag. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yes, love Fleabag.
Um, and just the writing in Fleabag, I think it's Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She's just incredible. The writing in that show is just amazing. I don't think she would ever do anything Tolkien related, but the way she writes, characters and character relationships and kind of personal turmoil is something that I would absolutely love to see in that setting. But again, I just don't think I could never imagine her doing something like that.
Yeah, I will actually say, and this again will probably be a controversial take, and I will say I'm not going to get into this discussion because I've said before I'm not going to compare fantasy shows. But the director who directed episodes 4 and 5 of House of the Dragon, Claire Kilner, I actually thought, considering that I have a real problem with how dark and brown filtered House of the Dragon is in terms of its visually, I thought she did some fantastic directing of character moments. So if you're looking for a female director who's worked in big budget television, you kind of have to look at something like House of the Dragon. So Claire Kilner's another name. But anyway, what I'm really trying to do here is just make people aware of interesting directors. I'm not saying that anyone has to agree. Okay, we've got 2 more questions, and let's finish up because I know we're running out of time. And these 2 are fun questions, so we've got past all the seriousness. Our good friend from the group chat, Maria, asks, "What's something on the show that you want to happen to piss off," and these are her words, so I apologize for language, "to piss off the dude bros even more since they're already angry about a lot of things"? What's something you'd like to see the show do which you know would just cause people to burst a blood vessel?
This isn't something that I would like to see happen, but it's something that I have seen happening. And it's that the characters that, those people are getting the most angry about are some of the most well written and well rounded characters in the show so far. And I just absolutely love to see it because that these people are sat there like, how am I gonna hate on this now? Like, they're genuinely good characters, and as each episode goes on, they're kind of grasping for straws even more every time they try and hate on them, and it's it's nice to see that they kind of, not that they ever had a foot to stand on in the first place, but every episode that goes by, their doubts are just getting kind of tread on even more because they're just incredible.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think you dodged the question there, but good answer all the same.
I don't know. I guess a lot of things that, like, the annoying Tolkien fans would get mad about are just things like that are already happening. People went crazy over this scene of Galadriel, besting the Numenorian
Oh
kind of
God, yeah,
trainees. But if they were like, oh, they're just making her look weak in front of all, no, making all the men look weak in front of her. And one, they weren't all men that she was fighting against. And two, it's Galadriel. Did you think that she was going to lose? I don't know.
yeah. To some green Numenorian recruits, I don't think that was going to happen. Okay, I will give an answer. I know I said it. I think I might have even said it last week. But if you want something quite controversial that I would love to see, is that we think there might still be a Balrog appearing in the season, right? I assume
Yes.
the Balrog is going to have to be vanquished. Here's my take. Let Galadriel kill the Balrog. Just let it happen. Let me see her do more sword parkour. Let me see her do some more insane fighting. Let Galadriel kill a Balrog. That's my hashtag campaign slogan for the end of the season. It's not going to happen.
You
I
know,
know it's not, but I would
I
love it
love
to.
that theory just because of how angry men, and I'm gonna say men because it was mainly men, got
Yeah.
over her killing the snow troll. Because oh my goodness, you would think that someone had paused the show and got on screen to say, "Oh, I hate Tolkien." That's what they were acting like that scene did, and
Yeah.
all she did was kill a snow troll, and she looked incredible while doing it. So you know what,
Yeah.
I would like that to happen too. Let Galadriel
Yeah.
kill a Balrog.
Yes, exactly. And I would like to say I support all forms of sword parkour. Legolas slid down a shield in Helm's Deep, and when I saw that film when I was 8 years old, it was my favorite scene in the whole film. So let kids have cool things to watch. That's what I also want to say.
Mhm.
Um, okay, and our very last question, and it is a funny question, but I don't know whether you're going to like it. This is the first time, in 4 episodes, someone has asked us a shipping question. So
Ooh,
we've
okay.
we've somehow avoided that discourse. Don't say it with such optimism in your voice. You're about to-
I have a feeling I know where this is going now.
Okay, so there's 2 parts. You might like one of them. Do you? And this question comes from Eowyn. Eowyn asks, "Do you ship Haladriel or Miridriel?"
I mean, I don't ship either of them seriously, especially not the first one. I think everyone knows how I feel about that. Yeah. Second one, they have the tension, they have the chemistry. Let them kiss. But
Yeah.
no, in a serious way, I don't think I have a ship that I'm like, yes, I really ship them. Bronwyn and Arondir, amazing. I can't wait to see how they develop. Durin and Deezer. It's kind of the established relationships that I'm liking. There's nothing at the moment where I have 2 characters who I'm like, I need them to be together. Um, yeah. But if I had to choose between one of them, it would definitely be the second one.
Um, I'll admit I'm not someone who's big into shipping. Like it's just not it's not a big part of my watching experience. I don't often ship characters. As for Galadriel and Miradriel, listen, I'm all on board. Let Miriel and Galadriel kiss. Great. They deserve it. They're both going through a hard time. Let them kiss. That would be fantastic. As for Halbrand and Galadriel, which I know you hate, the thing is, I don't want it to happen. I don't. But because I'm on the record as being a Celeborn hater, and I've got no problem with that. I'm not a fan of Celeborn. And because Charlie and Galadriel have such, Charlie and Mordvith have such great chemistry on screen. Listen, I'll say this: I see the vision. I don't support the vision, but I do see it. So maybe that will satisfy the Haladriel shippers. But I see the vision. I listen. I support you in your life choices, but I'm not going to be there in the trenches with you. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's I see why people ship them because they do have the chemistry, but as a ship, I really don't like it, if not entirely for the fact that it's just completely unnecessary for Galadriel's character to have that kind of love interest. But if, he's never going to be that love interest, then ship who you want to ship, It doesn't really affect how I view the show. And if you like the scenes together, then I'm glad, you get the enjoyment, because I do see it. And I
Yeah.
see so many fan cams. Someone made a Haladriel fan cam to my favorite Hosier song, and I was like, this is like a betrayal, even though this person doesn't know me. Um, but when I see the fan cams, I'm like, I get it. I do get the
Yeah.
ship, but yeah, it's not for me. It's not for me.
Yeah, I think we're both in that place. We see the vision they're going for, but we're just not on board with it. It's like,
Yeah, see, I tend to ship myself with characters more than other characters, so that's that.
yeah. Well, we all know that the Anna and Adar pairing, the Anna and Elendil pairing, the Anna and Aragorn pairing. Am I missing any? Do you want? I
I
mean,
think
you
you've got
don't
all the
have to
main ones.
self-report.
No, I think you've got all the main ones. They're like my main men.
Okay. Well, we've managed to get through the whole episode without Anna going too crazy over fictional men, with the exception of that moment that I will be leaving in the show where you talked about your desires for Adar. But Anna, we have once again managed to go 2 hours in our discussion. Hopefully, we can edit it a little bit down in post. But thank you so much for joining me. What message would you like to leave with our viewers this week?
I would like to stand by my Adar comment. I was right. And I mean, yeah, I was right. And if you want to find me, you can find me at my LSR. I come and talk to Harry about the episodes every week, which I assume you will know if you've kind of made it this far in. So yeah, thank you for listening, and thank you, Harry, for having me on.
Anna, it is, as always, a pleasure to have you on. And I'd like to say I do support you as well in your simping for Adar. As much as I make fun of
Thank
you,
you.
I'm happy that you found your fictional villain with a rotting face and who is a father to orcs that you can feel comfortable with. So I'm happy for you. And I'll also say, if you follow Anna on Twitter, you might be treated to when it's occasionally 4 a.m. in the morning UK time, and Anna decides to do a bit of posting about Aragorn, which really is just a beautiful thing to behold. So that would be my little hook to get people to come and follow you if they're not already.
Yeah, I see. The best part of my Aragorn posting was actually when I had met up with you in London, and you kind of looked at my Twitter the next day and you were like, did you post this when we were together? And I was like, yeah. The
Yeah.
Aragorn simping, it never stops. There's no timeline. It's just 24/7.
Yeah, I have no idea what percentage of our viewers make it to the last minute of the podcast, but for those of you who do, here's a little treat. When we went to the world premiere in London, the night before, Anna and I met up and we were sitting in a pub and we were having a lovely time. We'd been chatting for hours, and Anna kept going on her phone. I didn't think anything of it the next day, and then I woke up the next morning. I was scrolling through my Twitter timeline, just seeing what I'd missed overnight while I was out touching grass and having a good time. And I discovered that while we were in the pub, Anna had just been sending tweets about Aragorn. Now, I support it, but I would just like people to know how chronically online we both are that happened.
Yeah, like when I say that I'm always on Twitter, I mean that I'm always on Twitter. Like I had my Twitter friend across from me, and somehow I still felt the urge to tweet. Like it never goes away. I think we are the type of people who need to touch grass.
We desperately need to do some grass touching, and I think where I'll end it is that of all people who would encourage us to go and touch grass, it would be Professor Tolkien. So there's a nice message to end. Thank you so much to Anna for once again joining me to break down this week's episode. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it as much as we did recording. Let me know what you thought of our discussion on Twitter. What are you hoping to see from Gil-galad's character arc in the future? Are you enjoying Isildur's journey so far? And what do you want to see most from these last 3 episodes? I'd love to continue the discussion on Twitter, so come on over and join us. But for today, that's all we have time for. As always, I'd greatly appreciate if you could leave a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you use. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back this weekend with my review of episode 6 on the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Namarie.